on a topic that I love. And I'm thinking that whether you love it or not, people may be asking you about it, and that is fasting. Now, I'm just going to give you a quick disclaimer. This is not the end all be all on fasting, but it might, if you're someone who already knows a lot about fasting, maybe it'll give you a few more pearls to help with the way that you partner with patients on giving them knowledge and implementation ideas. And if you're completely new to the research on it, again, it will make you feel more comfortable with the data and how to personalize different types of fasting for your cardiometabolic patients. So, many times people say, I don't have enough time to cook all this kind of food. You can always say, okay, well, we can incorporate a little bit of fasting into your day-to-day life because that would reduce the need for you to have to cook so much. Now, I don't mean to say that in a cynical or sarcastic way. I mean to actually open it up as an option for people who say, I don't have enough time. Oh, okay. Well, guess what? There's this huge thing called fasting that we can look into. Now, when you do that, you might need to educate your patients or maybe yourself on the unique versions of fasting. So we have caloric restriction, time restricted eating, and then intermittent fasting. So let's look at these specifically. So fasting is when you are limiting your calories down to 400 to 600 kilocalories per day. Now, there are different ways that you can incorporate fasting. So you can, not do full out fasting. You can just do a modified version of fasting, if you will, which is just calorie restriction. So generally, people may restrict their total calorie intake down by 25 to 40%. So that's, kind of a entry level way of fasting. Now, what some other people may do is find certain days of the week, which actually is rooted in many ancient cultures, to incorporate fasting days during the week. So some people may say every Monday I'm going to fast, or every second Monday I'm going to fast. But the idea is that, for many people who are trying to get health benefits, it may be somewhere between 2 to 3 times per week that you are limiting your calorie intake to 400 to 600 calories per day. So if you're my size, you might pick a 400. If you might be more than petite, you might increase what the fasting caloric boundary is, okay? Now, here's what we know. Across the board, fasting seems to be beneficial for gut microbiota. Now, the way that I explain that to my patients is your digestive system has employees. And if you have your employees working every single day from 7:30 in the morning to 11 o'clock at night, 7 days a week, your employees will not be fully functional, healthy, able to take on the world. I mean, that's the way it works for our human bodies. Why wouldn't it be the same for our microbiome employees? So what fasting does is it gives your microbiome some off time, some holidays, right? So if you take a full day fast, it's like you're giving them a holiday day in general. Or if you at least limit the time that you're eating, as we'll learn, that again gives your gut microbiota a break. And what seems to happen is that it improves in compositional diversity, okay? So the other thing to state is I'm giving some data around some of the general benefits that we have about restricting our times of eatings or our calorie. With the calorie restriction, we see that for patients, like even with significant heart disease, specifically congestive heart failure, we'll see that when we calorie restrict, you can actually reduce the dysfunction in the heart and improve the inotropic reserve. And again, we seem to find that when you restrict calories, it seems to initiate or trigger this kind of growth response, if you will, in a good way. It kind of signals to the body, hey, let's clean up and make new good stuff. That's kind of what's happening here with the heart, and we'll see other examples. Now, I'm introducing another word called intermittent fasting. Now, intermittent fasting is an umbrella term, and there's maybe two different ways that you can think about intermittent fasting. The first way, which is what most people associate with the word, is time-restricted feeding or eating. When we use lab, animals, we say time-restricted feeding. When we use humans in real life, we say time-restricted eating. So you may have seen this play out when you hear people say, oh, I'm intermittent fasting from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. Or, so this is the 16 hours off, the employee's off for 16 hours, and then on for those 8 hours between 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. That's kind of the most popular one that I've heard about / use in my practice. Now, you can take it a step further and go 18 hours off for the employee and have them work 6. And you can also ooch into this. It's not like when you start with intermittent fasting with someone who's been, eating from 7 in the morning to 11 at night. You don't just say, whoo, let's crunch that down for everybody. There may be some people who you just say, okay, let's kind of say that you start at 8 and you stop at 8. Maybe you do a 12-12 in the beginning and then slowly get them to the desired end goal, 16-8 or 24 on some of the days. What you decide works for the patient and what works in their body. Now, this is different than this other subtype of intermittent fasting, which is called alternate day fasting. Now, this is saying kind of eat like you would in a regular, healthy way on 5 days of the week, but 2 days of the week, we want you to fast down to 400 to 600 calories. Okay, so you can work with your patients to find out, is it better to make it like a daily restriction of time and calories, or is it better to make it periodic? What we find, though, is that when people are intermittent fasting, just specifically for 14 to 16 hours or for 24 hours, we're going to start seeing changes. So here's, again, just a definitions page for you to understand that there are different types of intermittent fasting, whether it's time restriction or if it's actually alternate day feeding. And now these are just the specifics of how you would do it. Let's see what other factors play a role, then we see what benefits we get. So with intermittent fasting, what we believe is happening when you restrict the time is that you're honoring circadian biology. Like you're saying, I get it. There is a certain time we should be eating and a certain time we should be not eating so that the body, the rest of our systems, have a chance to work on other priorities. Seems like, again, the gut microbiome appreciates a break, and we also understand that when you start to take on fasting, again, whether it's alternate day fasting or time restricted eating, it starts to influence other lifestyle choices. Many people will report to me, I have more energy, I sleep better, I don't feel as heavy, so I'm actually more motivated to exercise. I don't have that full feeling, that sluggish feeling. So what it seems to do when you either restrict time or you alternate day fast is that it seems to promote weight loss and specifically your metabolic health. There's quite a few lines of evidence that seem to support this. And what I would tell you is, in my experience and my fellowship training in integrative medicine, what I've learned through the study of Ayurveda, and very similarly in traditional Chinese medicine, that nighttime eating tends to be the time that is, I'll say, the most problematic for patients, So some people are like, well, can I do an 8-hour, eating regimen where I eat from 4 p.m. to midnight? And I would say, you might get some benefits related to time restricting, but you're not honoring circadian biology because guess what? Sleep, your liver, and other parts of your body wanted to have digestion process be over 3 hours ago, right? It's almost like that's why we say 3 hours before bedtime should be when your last meal is, because we want that function to be done so other systems can do their job at the right time. So what we also know is that when we are comparing alternate day fasting versus caloric, just straight caloric restriction, that caloric restriction for many people is difficult to sustain because it just feels sometimes like deprivation, right? Whereas alternate day fasting, for some reason, for many people, feels like, oh, I still get to be normal 5 days a week. And then I just take this choice to restrict and fast a couple of days a week. It's kind of like they know they still have normal days to look forward to. Okay. So here's some, I'm not going to read to you because you guys are way too smart for me to read to. And I want you to know that the evidence is here for you to look at. I want to kind of go through themes though. Now, time restricted feeding or eating, remember that's when we talk about a daily kind of cinching in of the times that you're eating, seems to benefit weight loss and insulin resistance, metabolism, as well as risk factors for cardiovascular disease, very similar to alternate day fasting. So again, we can personalize based on what works for the person, right? I'm better at time restricted eating because it's just easier for me to go on autopilot every day than to plan what happens today versus tomorrow. But another person might be, let's say, a foodie, and they just don't want to be restricted every day. They'd rather just do it on those 2 days. So what we do know is that by restricting our eating to, let's say, an 8-hour window, even if we back it off to 12 or 10 hours, it seems to help things in your brain, your liver, your adipose tissue, your muscle cells. Think of everything that is affected by insulin, and energy sources all seem to line up. Okay. Again, you'll see in this slide here that late night eating, not so good because it's disruptive to sleep and other metabolic clocks, if you will. What we notice is that insulin sensitivity decreases throughout the day and into the night. So that's why we want to stack our eating earlier, if you will, in the day. We don't want to do like a 4 p.m. to midnight setting for restriction, right? I tend to aim 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. as my goal, assuming the person has like a normal daytime life and not being a shift worker. We also want to know that, if you can just ask people to restrict, like give their employees 16 hours off, because that's what we give for ourselves if we're full-time employees, that it can not only improve metabolic shifts from fat metabolism, but it also, as you see here in this article, can stimulate adaptive cellular stress responses. So it helps the repair function of your body, right? Reduces inflammation, because maybe it's affecting the gut microbiome, improving it. Remember, that's a common source for inflammation. And because inflammation is down, maybe the body says, oh, we might as well heal since inflammation is down, right? We're not in survival mode. This repair aspect seems to go specifically as well into the mitochondria, helping with our DNA repair. It's helping to stimulate autophagy, meaning, eating up our old kind of unhelpful old cells and making space for new, higher functioning cells to be developed, right? With the foods and stuff that we're eating. So not only does it give your employees a break, but it also signals to the mitochondria, like the power source of our entire body and all of our different organ systems, like, hey, let's get you stronger. Let's clean you up. Let's make life easier for you, mitochondria. So this is another article about fasting, specifically intermittent fasting and gut microbiota. Again, this gut rest, giving your microbiome employees a break, reduces leaky gut, or the permeability we talk about, and especially reducing postprandial endotoxemia. If you remember, that is a common source of inflammation that then drives insulin dysfunction and then also blood sugar, right? So there's just so much research that talks about the benefits of fasting or intermittent fasting. You see these listed here for your reference. Use whichever one works for the situation that your patient is dealing with. So we want you to understand that even for patients with diabetes, that you might be worried, like, what if they get hypoglycemic? you can do short-term daily intermittent fasting as a possible approach for them. We want to, of course, select the right patients and not start low and slow on a patient who might be more fragile, right? You don't kind of want to go straight to 16-8 if they haven't ever fasted before. So here's some selection considerations. On the right side, you'll see patients to consider that would more likely benefit: people with inflammatory conditions, lipid issues, cardiovascular disease, weight issues, specifically overweight or obese, or frank diabetes. Whereas people on the other side, if they are underweight, pregnant, having those kinds of issues, that might not be the ideal candidate to start with fasting. There are a few downsides of fasting that you want to be conscious of, right? Because not eating can trigger some mental cravings and binging. We want to make sure that we don't trigger hypoglycemia, especially for our patients taking insulin, or we just want to make sure that we're timing everything correctly with the medication so that we're not depriving the body of what it was planning on having or what it got used to having, okay? So again, there are negative intermittent fasting findings. I would just purport to you that you tell me a condition, I will find you good and bad studies for it, right? It's just the way of evidence-based medicine. It's rare that one thing is just all brilliant, gold, light, perfect in every single study. So it just behooves you to know that there may be some things to consider that could be negative for your patient. But here are the key points that I would have you consider. Overall, overwhelmingly, intermittent fasting has been shown to be beneficial, and it's comparable in terms of weight loss to chronic calorie restriction, but maybe a little bit more tolerable than calorie restriction. It's great for the brain. It's great for the microbiome. It's definitely something that's in line with circadian biology, and it seems to be able to really improve metabolic health in many patients who have insulin, glucose, lipid, inflammation issues. And again, it really honors what we think the microbiome appreciates, which is a break, okay? So whenever you're looking at the data and you see things that are promising or not, what I would invite you to do, this slide is a reminder to me to tell you, you don't have anybody do fasting because paper says to do it or evidence says to do it. Whenever you start someone, you say, let's explore this if you're up for it, and then let's track you, right? So in our go-to-it model, we always want to do the tracking and to make sure that whatever regimen we created for fasting is showing changes in their clinical or in their biomarker results. So we have a great toolkit item for you on intermittent fasting. If all of what I showed you was a bit too much, it's there to make it easy for you to prescribe it. So if there's somebody that you want to delegate it to, you can have them do the education. It's all there for you to be able to use. These are the references in case you ever have any concerns. So that is my section on fasting. I'm really excited to introduce up next.